top deck and equinox. Thank you very much.
Every day of the week.
A stone wall behind it with these two waterfalls rolling down.
Soup, I think. They said it was 11 miles over the ridge from Carson. So my friend John Kinney and I shouldered an axe and a couple of blankets apiece, and off we went, tramping across the flatland. We toiled laboriously up one ridge 1,000 miles high, looked over, no lake there. So we descended the other side, toiled up the next ridge, 4,000 miles high. No lake. But at last, Lake Tahoe burst upon us. This noble sheet of blue water lifted 6,300 feet above the level of the sea. And I exclaimed to my friend John Kinney, I said, the fairest picture the whole earth affords. Don't you think? We hiked down to the water's edge over here at what you call Glenbrook now, just north of Cave Rock there. There were perhaps 15 people living throughout the wide circumference of this lake at the time. We were going to claim a timber ranch and become wealthy. They needed timber over on the Comstock. Well, at the water's edge, this is the strangest thing today. At the water's edge, we found a small skiff that had been left behind by the brigade boys. And we rowed that small skiff north on the east shore. Well, that is to say, John rowed. Not that I have anything against exertion, I don't. It's just that I get sick when I sit backwards when I work. That 3-mile pull brought us to a campsite they talked about. It was growing dark, so we spread our blankets between the warm boulders there, and soon enough, fell asleep. Can we turn that down just a little, Drew?
Yeah, okay.
Careless of the procession of ants that entered through rents in our clothing to explore our persons. And if our consciences had any sins upon them, they had to adjourn court for the night. For we slept without movement, awoke in the same positions, thoroughly refreshed. So much so that we held foot races in the sand to tone down our physical vigor and exuberance of acres free. So we found a stand of yellow pine we liked, about 300 acres, and we started in our fence. Which is to say, we cut down some trees so that they fell to form an enclosure with some pretty wide gaps in it. We cut down 3 trees apiece. But we found it to be such heartbreaking work that we wasn't anything really. In fact, I like to take credit for the first prescribed burn here in the Tahoe Basin. Yes, I'm hoping for a plaque over here one day. We paddled around on logs out here on the Lake of the Sky. It was like balloon voyaging. The water was so clear you could count the scales on a cutthroat trout at 80 feet. I had a forest ranger question me on that fact the other night, only because she said a trout doesn't have any scales. So I've learned not to tell fish stories where they know you. But we'd be paddling around out here and you'd see a building looming up out of the water at you. Then it would turn into a cathedral until you realized you passed over it was but a boulder perhaps 20 feet down. But the water was so clear it magnified everything. The water was clearer than the air, and the air was the air that angels breathe. I wrote to my sister Pamela out in Missouri. I said, Mila, you must come out here to Lake Tahoe. Inside of 3 weeks, you'll have the strength to knock a bull down with your fist if you want to. 3 weeks of camp life at Lake Tahoe will restore an Egyptian mummy to its pristine vigor. I don't mean the oldest and driest of mummies, of course, but the fresher ones. I knew a man who came here to die once, but he made a failure of it. He was but a shadow when he first arrived, and a very poor sort of shadow at that. And inside of 3 months, he was eating all he could hold, sleeping out of doors regularly, and chasing game up and down these 3,000-foot cliffs for recreation. This is not a fancy sketch, I'm telling you, but the truth. The petrified truth. You see, truth is the most valuable thing we have, so I try to conserve it. We never slept in our...
Miller. Well, thank you very much, folks. And thank you, Mr. Twain. How does a man write poetry when everyone else is thinking of survival? Well, sometimes good words are just as important as being able to survive at all. Because without them, just it seems as though there ain't a whole lot worth surviving for. The Sierras, indeed, they've always been a source of inspiration for me. I recall the very first time I had ever laid eyes on this beautiful mountain lake. I recall it just took my breath away. So magnificently beautiful. It was winter then, and I recall the first thing that was inspired in my imagination was not the story, was not the life that it is today, but what it once was, how it was created. And my imagination conjured a time when the only beasts that roamed this mountainside were the glaciers. And as they moved and spoke, their voices shaped the very mountain faces we see today. The bird, the very lake we're riding atop of. Yes, indeed, Lake Tahoe. This beautiful mountain lake, like none other I've ever seen in all my life. Some magnificent people have also come through this area. Kit Carson, who was amongst the first Europeans to ever chart this summer hours. Oh, I would bum God's garden through for honey till I came to you. Ladies and gentlemen, Lily Langtree.
Wow.
Thank you. It is good to see you again, my old friend. Well, by the time I made it to America in 1882, the whole world had been captivated by the wild American West. Mr. Joaquin Miller himself must have been the first man to walk down London streets wearing spurs, cowboy boots, a red bandito belt, and a cowboy hat. At one point he tried to wear that six-shooter, but we advised him against it. Still, he cut quite the figure back then, and does today. Well, at that time, the largest city between Denver, Colorado, and San Francisco, California, was Virginia City, Nevada. So I performed there at Piper's Opera House. And the first night of my performance, the miners were so taken with me that they threw gold and silver up onto the stage to where it almost stacked up to my ankles. I had to do some fancy footwork in order not to have my toes crushed by gold nuggets. Well, they were so pleased they asked me to stay and perform a second night. Happily, I obliged. But the second night it rained. And the dear people at the International Hotel where I was staying at was so worried I was going to get my beautiful gown muddy that they decided to roll out a carpet all the way from the hotel to Piper's Opera House. That carpet happened to be red. So I like taking credit in being the first celebrity treated like royalty with rolling out the red carpet, a tradition I'm told still continues today. That was an amazing time, though, coming across this country by train, watching the way the landscape changed. But I have to say, of all the stages in the world, this one has to have the most beautiful backdrop. No set paintings required.